Hello there. Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means? It's story time here in the archive, and I don't know about you, but I am really happy to be reaching this point with A Warrior's Heart. We're going to finish the last 3 chapters tonight, and if we have enough time, I'm going to read The Flame She Carries, which is the one-shot that bridges basically the entire arc, but it bridges Warrior's Heart and steps into the past. But it's basically the spine of her whole arc. So that's what I'm hoping to get done this evening. I hope you guys are doing amazing. I've had a really awesome week this week so far. The weather's been gorgeous, and we got some much needed rain over the last couple of days, so it's cooled everything down a little bit, which I'm very thankful. You guys are doing well this evening. I'm gonna get a little bit of water, and then we can get into reading. Just 1 second. As always, I have water literally right here, right out of camera, because it's really important, especially when I'm reading, that I stay hydrated so I don't lose my voice. Even sometimes with the water, I will lose my voice because I'm doing a lot of different voices and vocal ranges. So I do keep water handy just to make sure that I don't lose my voice quite as much. I'm really hoping that that helps this evening. Before any of my mods bug me about it, yes, I have done my eye drops. I did not do that last stream and I regretted it. So, I have actually done that today. I'm hoping that I won't have my eyeballs deciding to rebel. I'm in the middle of trying to read stuff. So. Do let me know if the music is too loud, too quiet. I'm trying to keep it just so you can hear it without overpowering my voice at all. So. Now, if I can do this without losing my voice, I'll be doing grand. Okay. Is that any better? Let me know. Alrighty. A Warrior's Heart, Chapter 26. There we go. Marin had left the others behind in the spine corridor after their quiet exchange with Jared and Iran. She hadn't meant to wander, just to clear her head, but her steps had led her toward the cockpit anyway. Quiet place, somewhere near the stars. Everything looks good on the ship's systems, though he kept glancing at the view screens as he sipped his calf. The McMT system drifted slowly around them, a world that looked deceptively peaceful. They had a few more hours before reaching their exit vector, the last leg before Korriban. The spacer didn't turn when he heard the faint scrape behind him. Cargo still latched? Marin slid down the edge of the hatch and leaned against it. Looks good. Clamps are tight, she replied softly. Good, he murmured. We check every few hours. Hyperspace doesn't rattle it much, but these old crates can shift in sublight. I've been checking them myself, she said. More than needed, probably. You ain't the first to walk loops when something's waiting at the other end. He leaned back with a tired grin and lifted the mug again. Hurry up and wait. That's what this job is, mostly. She gave him a quiet laugh and sat up a little straighter. Or a hut. You miss the important things when you rush. Her voice softened. I've had to learn that more than once. Have you learned it yet? He asked, knowingly, glancing sidelong at her. I think so. Her hand drifted to the tags resting under her tunic. Coruscant taught me that. He saw the motion and caught the weight behind it. Memento? My father's. He'd leave them with me when he went on missions. Said it meant he'd always return. The spacer's expression shifted, gentle but distant. Mine was like that, when he could be home. He was still out there when I left. He died during the final push on Coruscant. Took weeks to even hear. I was 12 when Jarius died. Almost 13. Merrin's voice was low now. I felt it in the Force. He was lured into a trap by someone who wanted him to fall. I saw it. Flames, and I heard his voice. The spacer nodded slowly. We all carry ghosts. Merrin nodded, her own gaze distant, her eyes reflecting the faint starlight beyond the viewport. I nearly went after the man who did it. Would have thrown away everything to end him. Nothing wrong with the wanting, he said, quietly. It's the doing that decides who we become. He looked down. Ethan reminded me of that. He chuckled. Rough sort, that one, but solid, like good Durasteel. He smirked. Exactly. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the ship's hum surrounding them. Finally, he glanced at the chrono on the dash. Time for mid-meal, he said, pushing off the seat and stretching. Wonder if your Jedi friends cooked anything edible. If not, I can. He grinned. Jarius taught me to cook when I was 8. Strange considering how we met. The spacer raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh? I tried to rob him. She laughed slightly. I snuck aboard the Trasinia on Corellia. Tried to gut him with a knife. I was hungry. Thought he'd kill me, or turn me in. But he didn't. No, he just saw something in me, I guess. The spacer grinned, something almost wistful in his expression. Good captains know. The ones who've seen enough to spot the ones worth taking a chance on. She looked away, tracing the tags at her collar one last time before tucking them away. He was a better man than most, even if he didn't think he deserved it. Okay. You carry that, right in your spine, girl, even if you don't wear the name every day. She stood. Come on, I'll check the galley. As she turned, Jared was already approaching, drawn by her absence. He said nothing, just offered her a look, the one that always asked, Are you all right, without needing to actually say it. I'm good, she said softly. Then, as if remembering, Teleran, Kef, and Food are coming. Jared smirked faintly. He already checked the clamps twice. Thought you'd beat him to it. She gave a tired laugh, brushing her braid back behind one shoulder. Of course he did. Jared watched her for a moment longer, and then followed her towards the galley, their steps fading into the hum of the corridor beyond, two shadows walking forward toward whatever came next. The galley was compact, wedged into the aft corner of the main living deck, but someone, probably Stefan, had set up the folding table extensions and heated up a basic stew from the stores. It smelled better than it looked. A small pot of calf steamed near the rear bulkhead, already half emptied. Merrin ducked in first, brushing her braid back as she stepped toward the counter and checked the pot. Looks like we're not starving, she said over her shoulder, grabbing the ladle. I wouldn't speak so soon, came Stefan's dry voice from where he sat on the fold-out bench, his legs crossed, one arm draped over the backrest. He looked up from his datapad and gave her a faint smile. I've never claimed to be a cook. Then you're lucky I didn't bring Naul, Aran muttered, slipping in next and giving the calf pot a suspicious sniff before pouring a mug anyway. You sure she didn't try to poison you? Gillen added from the corner, propped up on a crate with a ration bar half chewed in one hand. She didn't, Aran said calmly. That was just her cooking. Merrin shook her head as she filled a few bowls. You're all impossible. I resemble that. Jared offered as he took a bowl from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. His voice was quiet. He hadn't said much since they left the cockpit, but his presence had stayed close, like gravity. Thanks. He just nodded and passed the next to Dylan, who accepted it with a grunt and flicked his eyes toward Stefan. So, we talk tactics now or after? After, Stefan replied. You've got a full system to traverse before anything actionable. Eat first. You fight better with food in you anyway. Aran sat next to Marin, stretching his legs out beneath the bench. He leaned up since Tanagas and wore an unmarked flight suit in rusty red. Been a while since I traveled with a full crew, he said, his voice low but not unfriendly. Used to just be me and the shadows. Now it's us, Marin replied, not looking up from her stew. No shadows. Not anymore. Silence stretched for a moment, and then Stefan set his data pad aside and leaned in slightly, his forearms on the table. I've run this route before, he said, and I'll be blunt. This extraction may not be clean. We still don't know who the girl is or what the Sith wanted from her, but the fact they left Marin alive back at the chapel suggests something larger is in motion. They were Sitsi, Marin murmured, the ones who followed Ariana. It's not just the Sith anymore either, not just Death Watch. Something else. We'll find out, Jared said, quiet and steady, the way he always was before the storm. And when we do, we finish it. Stefan met his gaze steadily. We extract Rinius and the girl, we confirm the intel, and then we act. He looked around the table. We don't have battalions of Marines, we don't have a Katani battle group, it's just us. That has to be enough. It is, Aran said without hesitation. Marin looked down at her bowl, watching the steam rise from the surface. Sorry. Then she looked up at all of them. Dylan's calm resolve, Aran's focus, Jared's steady strength, Stefan's worn wisdom. It had to be enough. She reached for the hilt of her saber, where it hung at her belt. Plain. Forged in the quiet after the storm. Forged for this. I'm ready, she said softly. We all are. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full of weight, of promise, of the long road ahead. I'm gonna take a second and get some water. Because, male voices. The lights in the galley were dimmed, humming low. The last bowls had been scraped clean hours ago, and the others had drifted off. Some to meditate, some to rest. Marin lingered, elbows on the narrow table, fingers laced, staring at the empty calf mug in front of her. She hadn't worn her armor since stepping aboard, just the worn flight gear, the saber clipped to her belt. Not the one taken on Bastine, nor the one she lost to Jenner, but the one she forged afterward. Plain and honest. The door hissed softly and Stefan stepped through. He didn't speak at first, just pulled out the opposite bench and eased onto it, setting a datapad down and folding his arms. You're quieter than usual, he said, after a long pause. I'm focused, she answered, though the words didn't come with much heat. Focused, he echoed, and then nodded. Is that what we're calling it now? She huffed and dropped her gaze. You're not going to give me the lecture again, are you? No, he said gently. No, Ethan gave that one on to Nagas after you tried to walk with your knee torn open and 3 broken ribs, just because you couldn't sit still. She didn't flinch, but her fingers curled slightly. I remember. I couldn't be idle. Not then. You still can't, said another voice, low and steady. Aran was leaned against the bulkhead, his arms folded, a shadow in the dim light. He hadn't said much since they'd lifted off, but now his gaze was clear and it was fixed on her. You don't have to fight the memory every day, he said. You survived it. He looked down again. Barely. That's still surviving. The door slid open again. Jared stepped in quietly, his eyes scanning the room, the tension in the air. He walked to Marin's side without a word, sat down beside her, not close enough to crowd, but close enough to feel. No one here thinks you're weak, he said softly, or reckless. Not anymore. Marin gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. You sure about that? Stefan raised an eyebrow. Marin. She exhaled hard and it all came tumbling out, quieter than a whisper. I was supposed to be the trap, not the one who got caught in it. And I knew better. I knew better. Her hands trembled slightly against the table. I walked into that clearing, full armor, full confidence, and they pinned me like it was nothing. I couldn't even get to my saber in time. You bled, Iran said. You survived. You healed. That's not failure. Jared reached out then, gently brushing his fingers against the back of her hand. I carried you out of that clearing alive, Marin. And the people who tried to break you didn't. She swallowed hard. Silence sat heavy for a moment before she turned to Stefan. You saw me at my worst. I didn't even know who I was anymore, and you still asked me to come. Because I know who you are, Stefan replied calmly, even when you forget. Her throat tightened and she looked down at her saber once more. The plain hilt sat against her hip, quiet and unassuming. Forged not out of glory, but necessity. Forged after she crawled out of the dark. I built that when I could barely stand, she murmured, after they took everything else. I made it because I couldn't let them decide who I was. And you didn't, Jared said softly. You never let them. There was a long pause, and then Iran pushed off from the bulkhead and stepped forward. You're not the same as you were before the clearing. Good. None of us should be. You grew from it. Stefan leaned back and nodded. You don't owe anyone proof, Aaron. You've already paid more than enough. Her eyes shone faintly, but she didn't look away. I don't want to lose anyone. You won't, Jared said. Not this time. Marin closed her eyes and nodded. The words didn't heal the scars, but they settled something in her chest, something deep and brittle. She'd broken once. Now she was whole enough to move forward. Sorry. The hum of the ship was constant, a lullaby and a warning layered beneath layers of metal and memory. Marin sat alone in the dim corridor just off the galley, one leg stretched carefully along the bench, the other curled close. Her saber lay across her lap, simple, unadorned. Built quietly with hands still shaking after the chapel. Jared found her there, silent and distant, her eyes shadowed in the low light. He didn't speak at first. He just stepped into the corridor, leaned a shoulder against the bulkhead, and waited. You're not sleeping either, she said quietly. He shook his head. No. She didn't look at him for a moment. Her fingers toyed with the ridged grip of the saber. Do you think I made the right choice that day? In the clearing? She nodded, just once. I went alone. I thought I was prepared. You were hurting, Jared said gently, still healing from the trials, from your father's memory, from everything they carved into you on Bastine. I knew the intel might be a trap, she said, her voice brittle, but I went anyway. I wore unmarked armor. I left the estate without telling Ethan or Greer. Thought I could handle 6 Kirtsot alone. You shouldn't have had to. That brought her gaze to him, sharp, wounded, but she was listening. I was halfway there when I felt the shift in the force, he continued. Felt you vanish beneath something cold. I ran and I pushed harder. Ethan got ahead of us in the final stretch. He swallowed. Hard. You cut the cables. Jared nodded. I carried you out. You were barely breathing, Marin. Silent stretched between them. The ache of it lived in both of their bones. Couldn't feel my legs for days, she murmured. Callista said the blade missed the artery by millimeters. I spent months relearning how to walk without flinching. And then you met your grandfather. That drew a flicker of a smile. He told me to stop favoring the leg. He showed me ways to regain strength. Jared smirked faintly. He wasn't wrong. You still limped for months. You still stood, he said softly. That's what matters. Footsteps approached, light and cautious. Aran was leaning just slightly in the entryway, not intruding, just watching. You all right? He asked quietly, looking first at Marin, then to Jared. I will be. Her voice was steadier now. Aran gave a slight nod. I couldn't sleep either. Jared gestured toward the bench. You're welcome to sit. He hesitated, and then did, across from them, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't say anything at first, just sat with them in the quiet. I remember that day, he said eventually. The look on Ethan's face when we saw her down on the grass. I thought... He stopped, exhaled. I thought she was gone. So did I, Jared said. But you weren't, Aran said, meeting Marin's gaze. You're still here. Marin touched the hilt of her saber again and then looked up at the two of them. You both pulled me back. You would have done the same, Aran said firmly. She nodded. I hope so. The silence that followed was no longer heavy, just quiet and steady. 3 warriors, 3 friends, bound by scars and trust in the fire that never truly went out. The spacer climbed down from the ladder, from the cockpit, his boots echoing faintly in the corridor as they peered toward the galley where Stefan and Dylan were hunched over a small terminal. His face was drawn in the dim light, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. Hard. 15 minutes to reversion, he said quietly. If you've got a plan, now's the time. Stefan looked up from the schematic. His eyes were sharp, though tired. Any chance they'll stop us and try to board? The spacer shrugged, the kind that carried years of experience behind it. Coin toss. Haven't been through that system since your last dust-up. It could be routine. Could be personal. At that, Marin shifted from where she sat against the bulkhead, alert now. If they were boarded, Stefan and Dylan would be recognized instantly. She might pass as crew. Might. Stefan's gaze swept over the room. Then we don't risk it. Dylan, Jared, and I will hole up in the container corridor. If they're patrolling, it won't be the same team that ambushed you on Catan, Marin. You, Aran, and Hatley, you're on deck as crew. Marin nodded silently and caught Aran's gaze. He offered a slight nod, calm and grounded. They both wore the nondescript coveralls, practical and forgettable. She taught him how to check the locking systems the spacer used, part of their cover, part of the caution. You'll want to move now, the spacer said, his voice quiet. The container hold is passively shielded. It won't stop everything, but it's better than betting on pure luck. Marin rose and followed Aran aft, checking each container seal along the way. She guided the camera probe along the seams, watching its readout as it rolled over the welds and latches. It reminded her of Tanagas, of her father teaching her to check tripwires hidden under leaf cover. Her heart ached at the thought, but she pushed it down. There was no room for grief now. Dylan unlatched the corridor hatch, vanishing into the container crawl space. Stefan followed, pausing beside the spacer. The intercom will be enough. Let us know if they make a move. You did! Hello, Wookiee Rage! Welcome in! Good to see you! I know, you never catch me on. Welcome in! Wait just 1 second here. Oh my goodness! You didn't have to do that, but thank you.
Haza.
Yay! You finally caught me! Yes. So we are currently finishing the final chapters of A Warrior's Heart, which is story number... Give me 1 sec. I can tell you. Story number 3, 4 in Marin's Heart. Give me 1 second. Story number 3. Okay. I can't keep track because I've added some stories since we started reading, actually. Not tonight, but just in general, since I started reading on the stream, I've added some stories. Okay. We have an ad starting in about 45 seconds. So I'm gonna read a couple more sentences and then I'm going to go to BRB because the ads are a great time to go get a drink of water, grab a snack, or anything of that nature. I'm gonna do the same. Aye, you'll have a few minutes warning. Just don't wait too long. Marin double-checked her crash rubbing and settled back into her seat. Hatley sat at the controls once more, his fingers resting lightly near the hyperdrive throttle. Don't scan right away, he warned. Let them think we're simple. The moment we start pinging the system, they'll be looking for trouble. Which we are. But there's no need to advertise. I'm gonna stop right there. Because we're about to be in an ad. Go get a drink of water, my friends. Gotta stretch. I will see you in a minute and a half. Alrighty, we are back from our ad. Thanks so much for hanging out during those. Unfortunately, I don't have control over the fact that they exist, so I try to work around them as much as I can. I do have a thing up at the top of my chat that notifies me and my moderators that we have an incoming ad, so I do try to let you guys know when that's happening. So, like I said, it's a minute and a half. That's the shortest I can make them without having 20 million. A rave. Wow. Yeah, Frosty Jules is kind of sucking up tonight. I don't know what that's about. I guess we'll find out. Frosty Tools is usually very snarky, so have fun with that. For those who don't know, Wookiee Rage is one of the DMs for the Star Wars role-playing group that I have been a part of for the last, 2.5 years? Something like that. It's a lot of fun. Something that we've been doing together as a group of friends for a year or two, and we're still at it. We're having fun. Oh, trust me, I know how that goes. Oh, excuse me, sorry. That's the best part, honestly. You know what? There we go. I'm doing something real quick. There it goes.
You're a feisty little one. Fit him with a restraining bolt.
Meshla Murid gifted a tier 1 sub to Wookiee Rage.
There we go. Took it a second. That should help with the ads. You're welcome. I can't do that very often, but I know that the ads are kind of a pain, so every once in a while when I can, I try to gift stuff. Thank you so much!
Bolt.
Oh hey, Tubba! Tubba got a subscription. Thank you so much. Tubba likes to lurk and hang out. Thank you so much. Definitely never mandatory, but I do appreciate when people gift subs to the channel. Anyway, where were we? Ah, yes. You're very welcome. Hope you enjoy the channel, since it's your first time here. There goes Frosty. Wow, here we go. Yes, yes, I'm well aware, Frosty. Thank you. For those curious, Frosty Tools is a bot that I use all the time. Yep, the other she dropped. Yep, totally. I was waiting for that. It's all in good fun, though. For Wookiee Rage's benefit and anybody else who may have wandered in, my name is Meshla. I am primarily an audiobook streamer. What that means for me is that I write and read Star Wars fanfiction, and I have been doing that for, oh my goodness, 25 years? Something like that. It feels really weird to say sometimes, but it's a thing. So yeah, I've been writing Star Wars fanfiction for a really long time. More than half my life, let's put it that way. And I really enjoy it. It's a way that I actually kind of unwind and work through various things, so I've continued to do it over the years and have developed some really awesome stories. Originally, I started out writing cooperatively back in high school, and at this point it's just me left, so I am maintaining some of the other stories and really focusing on the stories for my characters and developing their arcs a little bit more. And recently, in the last 3 months, I have been doing some editing and updates to various stories in Marin's arc, and we're progressing. So, oh, that's a great question. Before we get back into the actual reading, that's a really good question. It really helps me kind of think outside the box, because I mean, yeah, there's a general end goal for our stories, even in Star Wars RPG, that we have like a general end goal, but it is kind of open-ended. So I like that you, I like the fact that it's not fully set in stone and it can change. Like, and I've been noticing that too with the reworks that I've been doing on the stories. Like for this story in particular, like um it actually ended up longer in the rewrite than the original version, which is fine. I'm okay with that. I really prefer that there's rich detail and character development rather than focusing on a particular length for a story as far as chapters go. And that's my main goal with doing the reworks and updates, is to just really expand it and build in a lot more character growth. So but I definitely think that playing Star Wars RPG has really helped me think kind of outside of the general framework of the story. Like, originally it's helped me kind of explore other angles, which has been really fun. There were a lot of things in Marin's first story, Train Your Daughter, that they were kind of touched on, but I really wanted to expand it. That that story went from 30 chapters to I think 46, because I really wanted to kind of build out her time with her father so that it carried more weight, because originally she was only with him for like 8 or 9 months, I think. And this time around, after the rework, she was with him for like 6 years, which made a lot more sense narratively for it to be structured that way. So I'm really glad that I went back and I did that. So I really think that yes. Yeah, it was really interesting for me to take her original story and kind of turn it on its head. It made it really interesting. Thank you, Rafe. There's my mom taking care of me. Ooh. See, I have self-care redeems. Because I do a lot of sitting, so yeah, I agree that my character in Star Wars RPG she has a lot of the same elements as this version of Marin, because it's the same base character, but I definitely feel like it went a completely different direction, and it was a good direction. It was not something that I had actually considered as a direction for her, so it was actually really interesting to kind of explore that. It's not something that I would have considered doing for her, and like originally when I was writing, so it was really fun to kind of take it sideways. That was an excellent question. Thank you so much. Okay. And please feel free to drop questions in the chat at any point, whether they're about the stream itself, a writing process, how it links to Star Wars RPG, anything of that nature, and I will answer them as best I can when I'm, not super focused. Alright. Here we go. Don't scan right away, he warned. Let them think we're simple. The moment we start pinging the system, they'll be looking for trouble, which we are, but there's no need to advertise. Marin managed a faint smirk. Visual scan it is. Outside the viewport, the lines of hyperspace began to shimmer and bend. Silence deepened. The stars snapped back into focus. Korriban loomed in the distance, crimson and cruel. Quiet passed through the cockpit like a breath held too long. Hatley adjusted course, his hands light in the controls. "All right," he said, almost to himself. "Let's see how bad it is." "Begin scanning." Marin leaned forward and keyed in the sweep, and the sensors flickered to life with a soft hum. "Light debris. 2 vessels in orbit. They've got eyes on us." The comm crackled with static and authority. "Cargo vessel, this is Korriban traffic control. Strike your engines and prepare to be boarded." "Expected as much," the spacer muttered. Throttles slid to 0. "Complying, Control." Marin cursed quietly, the old Corlisi word sharp on her tongue. Moran glanced at her, his expression unreadable, and then turned his eyes forward. "Direction?" the spacer asked without looking. She took the panel. 15 degrees starboard. Interceptors. Fast. He nodded and keyed the comm. "Port side's the docking hatch. Mid-forward." The voice came back over the channel. "Have your crew ready for inspection." "Copy." The spacer set down the headset, his face calm. Almost too calm. Marin's heart was thudding against her ribs. She unfastened her crash webbing and stood, adjusting her collar. Her saber was hidden in the lining of her coverall, her force presence buried low. She felt like she was balancing on the edge of a knife. "Keep it calm," Hatley said as he moved toward the hatch. "We'll know when it's time to act. If we're lucky, we won't need to." She followed, her hands stuffed in her pockets, a ran close behind. The airlock hissed as the seals engaged. Too fast. Too efficient. 3 figures stepped aboard. Their combat suits reinforced at the joints, their faces obscured by dark visors. Each wore a lightsaber at the hip. They didn't speak at first, only scanned the corridor like wolves scenting blood. One held a datapad. "You're late." "You're lying," the spacer said evenly. "You got my schedule. We're early." Marin swallowed. She knew he was right. She'd memorized the flight log. They were ahead by at least 10 minutes. Center Sith stepped forward. "What did you say?" "I said," Spacer replied, not flinching, "you're trying to stir up trouble. Now either you're under orders or you're bored. Which is it?" Marin stepped forward slightly. "Would you like an updated schedule? I can..." The Sith's glare cut into her. "From him. I'll tolerate it. You. Keep quiet." Marin dropped her gaze, letting a flicker of fear show on her face. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. She could feel the tension in Iran beside her, tightly coiled. "You touch her again. We're done," Hatley snapped. "Now. Why the hostility?" The Sith's tone turned colder, if that were even possible. "We've had intrusions. Orders are to search all incoming vessels." Marin stiffened, but didn't move otherwise. "They knew something." "You've seen the logs," Hatley said. "No stops, no time to pick up anyone. You want to search the cargo? Fine, but don't start swinging threats at my crew. We could take the ship, kill all 3 of you." The spacer's hand moved slowly to a small switch on his belt. "Then you'd be ash. Dead man switch on the coolant system. You won't make it 10 meters before the whole thing goes critical." A long pause followed. Marin didn't move. Her hand was near her knife, body absolutely still. The Sith sneered and then turned towards the spine corridor. "We're inspecting the cargo. All of it." "Fine. Upper hatch first," Hatley said. He moved slowly, showing his hands. Marin waited beside the ladder. The Sith stepped into the compartment, and then a voice came from within. "Please, allow me." There was a sharp intake of breath, and then the hiss of sabers igniting, the brutal thrum of combat in tight quarters. The spacer leaned on the bulkhead, unworried. "Tried to tell them. Should have checked the right containers." Marin looked to Iran, her breath steady, and then towards the hatch as Stefan emerged. "Clear," he said. Behind him, Dylan and Jared followed, sealing the hatch. "Sorry about the mess," Jared offered. "I'll vent it," the spacer said. "It was empty anyway." "Dylan." Stefan said. Take Iran, check the shuttle. If it's usable, we'll need it. Marin turned to Iran and gently gripped his arm. Be careful. He gave her a small smile. Aren't I always? As they vanished through the hatch, Marin moved to gather their gear, her mind already turning ahead, to the surface, to what waited below, the fire she would walk through next. She wasn't afraid, but the weight of it settled over her shoulders like a cloak drawn tight. They were here. I apologize if my voice is going a little weird. All of these male voices are challenging. It took several minutes to load everything aboard, but Marin worked methodically, making 2 quiet trips from the corridor to the shuttle and back. When she was done, their gear was stacked neatly beside the forward bulkhead. Packs, weapons, and a few other essentials tied down with magnetic clamps. She brushed a lock of hair behind her ear and straightened slowly, her fingers lingering briefly on the worn strap of her blaster harness. The interior of the shuttle was cramped, tighter than she'd like. It smelled faintly of ozone and cold metal, with patches of worn plating and hastily integrated systems humming beneath the deck. Everything about it felt off-standard, patched together, improvised, just like us, she thought. Iran had already moved up near the pilot station, glancing over the controls. She stepped beside him and scanned the panels with a slight frown. I haven't seen anything like this before either, she murmured. But it looks workable. Her finger traced a control. I think those are light laser systems mounted forward. Iran's quiet chuckle broke through the silence. Light or not, lasers still bite. I'll take that over no bite at all. He glanced towards her. Doubt we'll be seeing anything bigger this close to the surface, unless they're planning to shoot themselves. Marin hummed in agreement. And it's better to use one of their own than bring something they'd flag from orbit. Exactly. It's camouflage with a flight deck. Sorry. He paused and patted the panel like it was a creature he intended to tame. Outside, Boots approached across the deck. Marin didn't have to look to know Stefan was back. He could feel his presence, steady and controlled, a mountain beside a storm. She sank into the co-pilot's chair and folded her arms. Her eyes focused on the nav screen. Her saber was still tucked deep into her gear, hidden for now. She knew the time would come soon enough. Iran settled against the bulkhead across from her, already pulling a small hold-out blaster from his sleeve. He began breaking it down with precise, methodical movements, eyes flicking up towards her once. Nervous? He asked, gently. Marin gave a soft laugh. Barely more than a breath. I fought Sith once before. The other day, it wasn't... She trailed off. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. It wasn't over. The thing she didn't say. Iran nodded, finishing the reassembly of the blaster and sliding it back into his sleeve. His voice was quiet, but sure. You'll do fine, and if it gets ugly, I'm there. I don't leave my squad behind. His hand rested lightly on his thigh, not quite reaching for a weapon. I haven't faced many Sith myself, but at the end of the day, they bleed like anyone else. Marin looked down at her wrists, rubbing at the faint scar just above her left gauntlet, the one from Tanaga's where she dragged herself too far past the breaking point and paid for it. They're ruthless, he whispered, but I won't let them take anyone from me again. That's the fight, Vodka, Iran said. What'd you bring? She asked, glancing over at the duffel stacked behind him. He listed it without hesitation. Yam, spear, spare ammo, a couple of grenades, my blaster rifle. I'm a decent shot if we need Overwatch or covering fire. Marin nodded and in turn offered her own. Saber, 2 knives, DE-10s, shuriken. The gams packed and ready. She hesitated. The saber is new. I built it after the chapel. Iran frowned slightly and then moved to one of the smaller satchels in his gear. After rummaging for a moment, he pulled out a slim, compact tool with a dull gray casing. Here, he said, tossing it underhanded towards her. She caught it with ease and turned it over in her fingers, her brow furrowed. It's a zap stick. he said. Custom job. Hide it in your sleeve or your gauntlet. The trigger is pressure-based. If you're in binders or stuck in something electronic again, thumb the center. Smack it on the nearest surface. Fires off a localized EMP burst. Short range, but it'll fry cheap security systems and a few other things besides. Marin stared at it for a beat and then smiled. Tight, but real. You do think ahead. He smirked. Had to. Sod weren't fond of mercy. Marin nodded and carefully slid the zap stick up her left sleeve, securing it with a small fabric loop. And then she turned her attention to her blasters, the old DE-10s battered and restored by Jarius, and then maintained with painstaking care. She checked each power pack, loaded and secured everything by instinct. Her hands moved with quiet precision, her mind wandered. To Nagus, the clearing, the cables, the shuriken through her knee, the chapel, and now, Oroban. This time, she would walk in prepared, with her eyes open, with her team behind her. She could feel the shift low in her chest, not fear, not yet, but focus, like her breath before a strike. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes, my friends. There we go. Marin watched as Aran locked the last of his gear into place, the blood red of his repainted armor making him seem more like a ghost from another war than a former Death Watch. The golden stripe over his heart caught the light faintly. Quiet statement she didn't ask about just yet. Instead, she returned to her own preparations, her fingers pausing briefly on the edge of her chest plate. Her armor was simpler, unmarked green-gray, plain and utilitarian, no sigils, no crest, not even the mythosaur or the Jedi insignia. She had deliberately left those behind for this mission. This wasn't about pride or legacy. It was about getting in, getting the others out, and surviving. Her father had always said, armor should serve the warrior, not the other way around. She tightened the straps and buckles on her van braces, feeling the familiar grounding weight settle into place. Aran gave her a sidelong glance and nodded in approval as he stepped closer, his helmet still tucked under one arm. The version suits you, he said with a low chuckle, and then with a flick of his wrist, a faint shimmer of a Deathwatch sigil pulsed briefly on his left pauldron. Projected light, not real paint. Nice touch. Naish? Marin rolled her eyes, but couldn't help the small laugh that escaped. I just hope it works. If someone pulls my helmet off, the game's up. They know my face. Especially Bevan. At that name, Aran's expression darkened. He growled softly, his shoulders tightening under his armor. He's here. The Chikar won't get near you. I swear it. She hesitated, then stepped closer, resting her hand on his forearm. Aran, I know you feel like you owe me, my family, but this mission, this anger, is it about that, or is there more? He was quiet for a long moment, and then he met her eyes and said rather plainly, honestly, it's selfish. If Bevan shows up, I'm going to kill him. That simple. Marin didn't flinch. Instead, she held his gaze and nodded once. Is that something you want to do alone? Aye, he said without hesitation. It is. She didn't argue. Then let's make sure we get to that moment alive, she said quietly. Aran gave a grim smile, and the two of them stood in silence for a beat longer, the hum of the shuttle's systems their only background. The rest of the team was preparing just behind them. But here, in this moment, it was just the two of them. Survivors, warriors, and maybe, despite everything else, friends. About 20 minutes had passed since their last conversation, and the hum of the shuttle's engines filled the quiet between them. Aran leaned forward from his spot behind the weapons console, resting his forearm against the edge so he could be heard clearly. Marin looked up from where she sat, just behind the co-pilot seat, the orange glow of her half-disassembled lightsaber casting soft reflections across her face. She gave him a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Too many times before. She had rebuilt this saber in haste, using a method Stefan had shown her for emergency construction, and it still bore the urgency in its form. No frills, No symbolism, just necessity. Still feeling alright about this, Baron? Aran asked quietly. His voice was steady, but not without concern. She frowned, turning the hilt over in her palm. What do you mean? He shrugged. You've got a bit of a habit for getting into trouble, Nish. She huffed a quiet laugh, conceding the point with a calm lack. And then, after a moment, she added, I don't really know why. It's not like I go looking for it. Maybe not, he said, rising and crossing to her side. He gently rested a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. But Alsic happens. Plans fall apart. People do. The only thing that matters is how you respond when it does. Mind if I offer a bit of advice? She glanced up at him. Sure, if you want. Amanda knows I've tried everything I can think of. He nodded. I know everything's chaos during a fight, and I know sometimes it just isn't possible. But if you can, stick with someone. Don't stray too far. Being cut off makes you a target. And we're about to be in an ad, so I will be right back, my friends. See you in a minute and a half. Go get some water. Because I'm gonna do that. There we go. Welcome back, my friends. Hope you had a chance to have a stretch, grab a drink of water, grab a snack if you needed that. Lagging a little bit, sorry guys. Alrighty. Give me just one sec while I check something. I don't know if that will work. One moment. Oh, of course I can't mess with that one. Hear me? Okay. I will fix it later. I apologize if you guys are getting a little bit of lag or dropped frames. I am seeing a little bit of latency on my end. It's something that I'm working on, so please bear with. Unfortunately, it's not something that I can fix while I'm streaming. Marin hesitated, her gaze distant. And if I am cut off? He sighed, his expression sobering. Then find something to put at your back. A wall, a ridge, even a downed crate. Anything. Keep your focus outward. Don't let them circle you. She nodded slowly, her brow furrowing in thought as she remembered Coruscant. That I can do. It's not a guarantee, Aran added. There are no guarantees, but it'll definitely help. Her thumb drifted over the tags that hung from her neck. Darius's tags, her father's legacy. The cold, worn edges of the Durasteel felt familiar beneath her fingers, like the weight of his hand when she was small. Jared would do everything he could to keep me safe, she murmured. But he won't always be there either. No one can be, Aran said gently. That's why you learn, why you adapt, why you survive. He paused, watching her. You've already come through more than most would have survived, and you're still standing. Barely, she said with a shaky laugh. Barely still counts. She looked up at him then, properly, and he could see the flicker of guilt and fear in her eyes. Fear not of dying, but of failing. Of being the one left behind. Again. Ooh, sorry. I won't let them down, she whispered. I know, he replied, his voice quieter now. But don't forget this, either. It's not about never falling, Marin. It's about getting back up, and choosing to keep going. The saber clicked back together in her hands with a soft, final sound. She gripped it, held it steady, and nodded once. Let's finish this. Aran gave her shoulder a final squeeze before stepping back to his console, the moment between them settling into steel resolve that would carry them through the storm ahead. The faint chime of the forward hatch preceded Jared's footsteps. He didn't speak right away, just ducked his head into the cockpit and studied them both for a long, quiet moment. Marin had already tucked her saber away. Aran was back at his post, watching the screens, but his eyes flicked over as the Jedi stepped into view. You two all right? Jared asked, his voice quiet, as if not wanting to break whatever stillness they'd carved out. Marin nodded, though her hands hadn't quite unclenched. We're prepped. Everything's stowed and checked. The shuttle's clean. Jared moved further inside, resting a hand lightly on the edge of her seat. His gaze dropped to her knees and then lifted to her face. And you? She blinked. I'm fine. He didn't press, but he didn't look away either. You've been quiet. She shrugged, trying to act casual. Thinking. About? Marin hesitated. She glanced at Aran, who didn't speak but didn't turn away either. Then she looked back up at Jared. What happens if Bevan is on the ground? She asked softly. If this is the end game. Jared didn't answer right away. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Then we finish it. Together. Like we promised. Her voice was quieter now. Aran said the same thing. Good. He looked at her with quiet intensity, because you don't face this alone. She exhaled and leaned her head back against the wall of the shuttle for a moment. He asked me if I was still feeling alright about all this. She murmured. I wasn't sure how to answer. Jared was silent, and then, you're allowed to be afraid, Marin. I know, she whispered. I just don't want that fear to make me reckless. It won't, Jared said. You've learned too much. You've come too far. Fear isn't what drives you anymore. At that, her lips quirked just slightly. You sure? He leaned forward, brushing her knuckles gently with his. I'm sure, and if you forget, I'll remind you, as many times as it takes. Marin laughed softly. You're stubborn. So are you. That earned a slight smile, and she looked between them both. Aran's quiet focus, Jared's steady warmth, her family in all the ways that mattered. Then let's make it count, she said. Jared nodded and stood again. We'll make the final approach soon. I'll let Stefan know we're set. As he moved to leave, Marin caught his hand briefly and squeezed it. Just once. Thank you, she said. Not just for now, but for all the times he hadn't let her fall. He squeezed back, just as gently. Always. And then he disappeared down the corridor, the soft sound of his boots fading as the shuttle began to angle for descent. The shuttle's soft hum deepened as they entered Korriban's upper atmosphere. In the rear compartment, Dylan adjusted the final strap on his chestplate and leaned back against the wall, eyes narrowing slightly as red-tinted clouds streaked past the viewports. Across from him, Stefan sat still, his gloves folded in his lap, his saber clipped loosely at his side. He didn't look at Dylan, but Dylan knew he wasn't seeing the walls of the shuttle either. "She's holding together better than I thought," Dylan murmured. Stefan didn't answer right away. "You know," Dylan continued, his voice low, "after what happened in the clearing, I thought it might break her. Pebble after that, losing her saber, nearly losing herself." At that, Stefan finally looked over. "She built another." "Out of need," Dylan said, watching him closely. "Not ceremony, not tradition, just survival." Stefan nodded slowly. "Darius never built one, you know." "No," Dylan's voice dropped. "He never got the chance." "There was nothing left but ash," Stefan said softly, more to the memory than to the present. "Ash, and his helmet. She brought it back herself. Still has it, I think." Silence followed. Dylan ran a hand over his scalp. "It makes you wonder what that saber really means to her now." "It's not about legacy," Stefan said. "Not this time. That blade, orange, rough, and plain, that's not about who she wants to be. It's about surviving long enough to figure it out." "She's had to rebuild too many times," Dylan said. "So did Jarius." That made Dylan pause. He glanced toward the cockpit, toward the bulkhead separating them from Marin. "You worried she'll follow too closely in his path?" "I worry she'll forget that she doesn't have to." Stefan looked at him, his eyes sharper now. "That she's not alone in this." Dylan leaned forward. You think she's ready for what's down there?" "No one's ever ready for Korriban," Stefan told him. "But she'll walk in anyway." He stood and fastened his outer cloak. The movement's calm and precise. "She'll do what she always does. Keep going, even if it breaks her." Dylan stood as well. "Then we don't let it." Stefan gave him a rare smile. "That's why I brought you." Outside, the wind howled across scorched rock. The shuttle's engines adjusted pitch, descending faster now. Whatever waited below, they would face it together. Alrighty. Alrighty. Chapter 27. The shuttle's landing struts hissed as they locked into place on the cracked basalt of Korriban, each shift of metal echoing like a challenge against the desolation. The dust that rose to meet them clung to everything, thin, bitter, and red, like the smear of blood over old stone. The planet wasn't what the archives had promised. Marin remembered the texture of the old hollows, the voice of the instructors echoing through the amphitheater on Mount Adon. Korriban, sacred to the ancient Sith, shrouded in mystery and silence. A place lost to time, feared by the wise. But this was not a tomb world. It was a staging ground. A desecration. Sith patrols moved with methodical efficiency across the broken terrain. Their armor was black and gray, coordinated. They were efficient, unrelenting. The wind howled as the ramp descended, laced with sand, heat, and something older, something wounded. Marin stepped down into it with quiet resolve. The armor she wore was simple, matte green plates over black fabric, utilitarian and unadorned, not Jedi, not fully Mandalorian either. It was not her training armor, it was armor meant for war. The chestplate was slightly scuffed, the gauntlet older than she was. Her silhouette nearly matched Aran's beside her, down to the unmarked shoulder pauldrons. Her lightsaber was tucked inside an old ammo case affixed to her belt. It wasn't ceremonial. There were no flourishes, no engravings, no crystal-studded hilt, Just a blade built by hand, by need, out of survival. She remembered forging it in the morning before they had left, still aching from the wounds of Catan, her old blade, lost in blood and smoke. Jared walked beside her. He was always close. His steps were light, but his gaze was hard. The armor he wore had belonged to Dylan, stripped down and quiet. His saber was hidden deep, as his presence often was. He hadn't spoken much since they passed the orbital perimeter, but his silence was familiar, reassuring. Marin had trained beside him for years. She could tell when he was about to vanish into instinct. The briefing had been simple. Stefan and Dylan would ghost the ravine, bypass the perimeter. Marin, Jared, and Aran would move toward the loading corridor. A 3-point strategy: infiltration, distraction, and recovery. Before parting, Stefan had drawn her aside. His voice was low, his eyes shadowed. Stay in the shadows until the time comes. And Marin, don't let this place make you forget who you are. She hadn't spoken, just nodded and turned away before the words could root too deep. She'd made it nearly 2 kilometers without incident, long enough to think, long enough to doubt. And then the pattern shifted. Comm lines buzzed with movement, patrols clustered, positions tightened. The air grew tense, not from the heat, but from expectation. Aran noticed it first. He said nothing, only changed their path with a flick of his hand. The ridge they followed sloped toward a forgotten passage, weathered and cracked with fading runes half buried beneath the dust. It cut through old rock, once carved by ancient slaves, now used by laborers and maintenance crews. According to the map from the captured shuttle, it would run beneath the stronghold's outer wall and feed into a service corridor. 3 of us, Aran had said, pausing beneath the broken silhouette of a collapsed statue. One distraction. We get their eyes on us, let Card and Dylan slip the gate. The strategy made sense. The risk did not. Still, Marin had nodded. They had almost reached the bend when the trap closed. 5, here at Sod, armored and armed. They formed up fast, 2 behind, 3 ahead. Their movements were sharp and disciplined, a unit that had practiced this before. The one in the center wore black armor with a crimson slash across the chestplate. Not Bevan, but from his line. Marin's breath caught in her throat. Not fear, but memory. The sigils on their armor were unnecessary. She knew. Her grip tightened on Jared's arm. Not forceful, it was a signal. 1 heartbeat passed, and then 2. Jared's shoulder shifted under her touch, acknowledging and grounding. I'm not familiar with either of you, the leader snapped. Names and purpose, now. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her voice came through modulated and cold. Parjai Marut. She tilted her head just slightly. Aran caught the cue and stepped forward. Bayan Baruch. This one's a slicer. Caught him in a secured channel. Interfered with offload traffic. There wasn't time for a report, so we brought him in. The lie was seamless, like breathing. The squad leader held their gaze for a moment too long and then gestured sharply. Here, will do. These 2 are escorts. Move. Tension knotted in Marin's chest. That had worked. That shouldn't have worked. Now they were deeper, and danger was closer. The 2 forward Kiratsad turned sharply. One moved to the lead position, the other fell in behind. Marin adjusted her stride. Jared shifted his weight. Aran took the rear. No words were exchanged. The corridor swallowed them quickly. Its walls half metal, half carved stone. The torches lining the upper sconces flickered in the stale wind, casting jagged shadows across the floor. The deeper they went, the less light followed. The floor changed, from gravel to grooved durasteel. The architecture shifted with it, from a burial place to a fortress. The bones of ancient Sith shrines had been buried beneath alloy and engineering. The air was still and heavy. 5 minutes passed like an hour. Marin walked in silence, every breath and every pace measured. She kept her hands relaxed, her posture loose, but her thoughts were wire-tight. Her fingertips hovered near the canister at her hip, her saber waited like a promise. She could feel it now, the gravity of the place. It wasn't the dark side, not in the way her instructors had taught. It was grief twisted into the stone. A long scream folded into the bones of the world beneath them. No voice, no identity, just pressure. A wrongness. Renius and Ariana were somewhere ahead, alive or... Marin's jaw tensed. No if. They were alive. Behind her, Rand's footfalls were even and deliberate. She couldn't see his face, but she knew his posture. He was reading every motion of the guards, measuring and waiting. Jared's presence beside her dimmed even further, pulled into shadow so tightly she could barely feel it. He was a ghost. They were almost there. Marin's thumb brushed the seal of the ammo canister. Soon, there would be no more pretending. No more silence, and no more lies. The moment they stepped further into the fortress, the walls closed around her like memory. Not just stone and steel, intent. The air was heavy with it, awaiting violence, patient as rot. Marin had fought before, on mountaintops and broken fields, on the steps of temples and the decks of burning ships. But this was different. This was where they could take her name. Every step into the corridor pressed that truth closer onto her bones. She could feel it in the walls and the way the lights flickered and buzzed overhead like insects drawn to blood. Every conduit that pulsed overhead reminded her of Bastine, of the scent of cauterized flesh, of her own breath forced calm beneath agony. She focused instead on the present, on the warmth of Jared's arm beneath her grip, on the steady tension in Iran's steps behind her. They were moving deeper now, through the bones of the Citadel. And the Citadel watched. Their escort was silent, save for the occasional clipped order, but Marin didn't need words to recognize the shift. The patrols had given way to something colder. Sith. Stationed along the main hall, they stood like executioners waiting for the gavel to fall. Their armor caught the low torchlight like oil on water, featureless and quiet. One wore partial robes over a cuirass of blackened durasteel, his arms folded, his presence like glass. Marin's stomach turned. She didn't break stride, but the sight drove her deeper into stillness. He's not alone anymore. Bevan had opened his gates to the Sith. That meant desperation or ambition. Both were dangerous. They passed under the central arch, where ancient stone gave way to obsidian alloy. A deeper knot tightened in her gut, the kind of instinct Ethan had once told her never to ignore. They were led to a halt near the interior gate, where a veteran Deathwatch stepped out from a line of enforcers. His armor was pitted and stained, the mythosaur on his chest carved in rough lines like a scar that had never healed. He wore his years without apology. A Sith leaned in to speak to him. Their tones didn't carry, but the tension did. Marin could feel the flicker of doubt that followed, subtle but real. So, the old enforcer said finally, turning towards Iran. His voice was like gravel under their boots. What is the nature of this prisoner? Jared bowed his head perfectly, his body language shifting into the guise of a beaten man. Marin almost flinched. She pressed her thumb against the clip at her belt. It was still hidden. Iran stepped forward with an easy confidence. We found him moving near the outer checkpoint. Didn't put up much of a fight, but wouldn't explain his presence either. Thought it wiser to let Bevan decide. The Sith didn't reply, but gave a subtle nod. Then bring him. If Bevan's in a generous mood, he'll waste time on another mouth to interrogate. The gate opened, and they passed inside. The fortress swallowed them. The transition was immediate. Stone to steel, dusk to firelight, memory to presence. Give me 1 second. Okay. There we go. The walls breathed with heat, the overhead lights flickering against rusted pipes and blistered conduit. The air was sour, laced with ozone and the faint trace of burned leather. As they walked, Marin's eyes flicked to every junction, every shadow. Her thoughts narrowed, not to the pain, not to the fear, to focus. And then they turned the corner into the next room. Her body stopped before her mind caught up. The rig. Rust-eaten restraints, circular frame, exposed conduit still live with a faint current, the iron scent of old paint never quite scrubbed clean. It was the same kind, not identical, but close enough. And close was enough. A flicker of heat rose in her throat, memory and bile. Her body remembered the bindings before her mind gave permission. Her fingers twitched. Duran. Pain. She forced herself to move. Jared stepped forward without needing direction. She unlocked his cuffs with cold precision, walking him to the rig and clamped his wrist in place. Bevan's visor turned towards them as soon as she did. He didn't remove his helmet. He didn't even need to. His voice was rough. Let's get this over with. I don't have time for games. Each movement Marin made was practiced. She was a shadow, a blade unsheathed but not yet moving. The sound of the clasp echoed loudly in the silence. Her hand brushed Jared's wrist for half a second. He didn't look at her. And then, Bevan was there, at the far end of the room, flanked by shadow and silence. He wore armor burnished black with age, red lines painted in crude bands across the chestplate like blood smears. The helmet was unchanged, battered and familiar. But it was the saber at his belt that caught her eye. Her saber. The one taken at the chapel, torn from her side when they left her in the dirt, bleeding and half-conscious, her chestplate carved with Sith runes. That blade had never been meant for his hand. Seeing it there was like seeing a piece of herself twisted into something unclean. Her breath caught. The force rippled around her in a sudden spike. She nearly lost her grip on it, on herself. But she remembered. Jared's calm, Aran's steadiness, Stefan's voice. Don't let this place make you forget who you are. She tightened her grip on the force, burying the flare beneath her bones. She would not show him anger. Not yet. Bevan approached, his hand out, seizing Jared's chin in his gloved grip. Who are you then, small one? Jared didn't speak. His jaw clenched. Marin's hand hovered low, fingers just above the holster for the borrowed blaster. The weight in the room changed. It became thicker. Jared, he said at last, his voice like gravel under pressure. Bevan tilted his head. Affiliation? Jared said nothing. Simply his name. Jared. His voice dropped to a growl. I don't have time if you won't talk. I'll start with your friend. Marin's lungs burned. Her heart skipped a beat. Not yet. Every twitch, every breath, every intention. She watched. The moment was coming. Sorry. Give me 1 second. She saw Jared stiffen against the restraints, his breathing ragged but steady. Still there, still him. His cheek was split, but blood trailing down his jaw, but his gaze was unshaken. Isn't it obvious? Jared muttered, his tone flat but full of acid. The response came immediately. Bevan's armored fist slammed into his face with brutal force, snapping his head sideways. The impact echoed like a gong through the chamber, bone and metal, rage. I'm not an idiot, Bevan growled. Where are they? Jared's breath caught, but then he turned back, slowly, deliberately. Blood welled beneath his eye. He met Bevan's visor with defiance, jaw set like stone. I don't know what you're talking about. Another blow, this one to the chest. Jared lurched forward. A strangled breath forced from his lungs. The rig rattled. a reminder of what this place had been built for. There are always more of you, Bevan spat. Marin couldn't breathe. Her fingers flexed near the throwing knives at her belt. Every muscle pulled taut. Her vision tunneled. Her breath was shallow. She felt her balance begin to tilt into that space just before the edge, the one Jarius warned her about. But Iran moved first. A whisper of motion, a flicker of cloth. His pistol cleared the folds of his cloak in a single breath, and he fired. The bolt cracked against Bevan's shoulder, shattering the upper pauldron and sending him staggering backward in a shower of sparks and blackened alloy. The smoke that rose from the wound stank of scorched paint and burned synthweave, but Bevan wasn't slowed. He turned, exploding with a roar that echoed through the hall. His left hand dropped to his belt, wrenching his weapon free, even as the wounded arm failed him. His movements were still fast, too fast for his age. Fueled by hate, driven by the past. Marin didn't hesitate. She dropped low, braced, and fired. I'm gonna pause right there because we're about to be in an ad, my friends. Go get yourself a drink of water. I'm gonna do the same. Alright, my friends, we are back from our ad break. Thanks so much for hanging out. Alright. The bolt passed through the air like lightning, burning into Bevan's wrist just as he raised the Ripper. Sparks arrested as the servo shorted. The gauntlet split open with a shriek of metal, flesh searing beneath the heat. He howled, raw, ragged, but still didn't fall. He switched hands, faster than she expected, and raised the Ripper in his left. Marin felt it a moment before it happened, an ugly spike through the force, sharp and honed. She threw herself to the side. The bolt screamed past where her head had been, stones shattered behind her, shards exploding outward. One caught her side, slicing through the edge of her armor. Pain bloomed. She hit the ground in a roll, her boots skidding. Her shoulder hit a strut hard, but she came up ready. She didn't check on Jared. She couldn't. She fired again. The bolt took Bevan in the knee this time, right where the plates had separated. It tore straight through. He faltered, snarled, but still didn't fall. Of course he didn't. Bevan was a specter of everything she hated, everything that had tried to unmake her. His armor was cracked and scorched, his breathing labored, but he kept coming like a man who'd forgotten how to die. From her left, Iran moved like a shadow. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Another bolt struck true, left shoulder, just beneath the joint. Bevan cried out, twisting, staggering, and snarling. The shot was clinical and measured, but Bevan was no longer controlled. He screamed, incoherent and furious, and raised both weapons. Twin bolts slammed into the floor at Iran's feet. The second blackened his cloak near the collar, but Iran didn't flinch. He shifted and ducked. And then, snap! The spear hissed open in his hand. A sound, like memory, like Tanagas. Marin felt it down in her bones. The warning in the sound. Bevan did too. He turned, slowly and deliberately, and rage shifted. His eyes found Iran, not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as a traitor. The blaster clattered to the floor, and the Bescad came free instead. A slow draw, almost reverent, like a promise. It caught the red light and held it, gleaming dully like something ancient. The edge was dulled from use, but no less deadly. It had taken lives. Patani, Jedi, and Mandalorian alike. Marin recognized the weapon, not its make, but its weight. The kind of blade a man used not for war, but for erasure. You, Bevan rasped. His voice was no longer just angry. It was broken. You! I should have killed you on Tanagas. I should have carved you down when you failed. The blade lifted, trembling. I'm going to erase your stain from my name. Iran didn't speak, but his stance shifted. His center of gravity dropped. Not to run, not to strike, to stand. A defiance older than words. Marin, still crouched near the rig, watched Bevan advance and edge towards Jared, who was still slumped in the bindings. Her heart was pounding, her limbs shaking, but her hand was steady as it brushed the catch on his left restraint. She whispered something she didn't even hear, and as she looked past the rig, past the crumbling walls and the ghosts whispering in the wires, she knew this isn't just a battle. It never was. This was where all of it bled out, where names were reclaimed, where truths finally would speak, even if it had to scream. For a heartbeat, Marin froze, not from fear, but from precision, the kind of stillness Jarius had drilled into her, the kind she had learned to trust when instinct screamed to move. Blood pooled at her lip where she'd bitten down too hard. Her chest heaved once, her lungs drawing shallow air through the stench of ozone, char, and burning synth flesh. The blade in her hand trembled, not from hesitation, but from the barely contained tension that ran up her arm like a wire drawn too tight. Her saber still hung on Bevan's belt. The first one. The one they tore from her side on Catan after dragging her from the chapel's ruin. The blade that had ignited with orange fire and gone dark in the hands of a butcher. She couldn't face him with someone else's weapon. Not yet. Not with Jared still half fallen and Iran spending blood just to buy them seconds. She shifted lower, keeping her blaster trained and slipping the knife from its sheath at her waist. The grip felt too familiar. Reverse, low angle, the way Jarius had taught her, not for flourish, but to end a fight fast. The shadows cloaked her like a memory. Her steps were near silent as she moved across the floor, the red dust clinging to her armor. Beside the rig, Jared stirred again. He was trying to rise without making noise. His eyes met hers, pained but clear. Marin braced her body between him and the chaos beyond. Her left hand moved for the clasp again, careful. Every breath was a weapon waiting to go off. Fighting continued meters away, the crash of metal, the snap of slug thrower rounds, Iran's spear whistling through the air in fluid arcs, Bevan's Biscad crashing against it in savage, grinding sweeps. The duel was no longer clean. It was blood and dust and stubborn survival. Marin's fingers found the catch. Flick. The last shackle hissed open. Jared crumpled forward, barely catching himself. His face was pale, his skin drawn tight, sweat mixed with blood along his temple, but his grip was still firm as she helped him up. She touched his pulse briefly. It was weak, but present. She passed him his saber, her hand brushing his as she did. His fingers closed around it, slow and reverent. There was no time for thanks, only shared breath, shared ground. And then the world pulled back into motion. Bevan had turned, snarling, and driven forward like a hammer. Iran reeled, stumbling under the weight of the next strike. Marin saw the blade arc downward and twist mid-motion, a feint. No, not a feint. A memory. The Biscad cut deep along Iran's shoulder. The scream that tore from him was pure pain, fractured and raw, and it shattered the last of Marin's restraint. Her breath caught. Her blood surged. She moved. There were no words, no orders, no plan. A Ripper slug screamed past her head, close enough to send a line along her visor. Another struck near her ribs, deflected only by the plate across her stomach. Sorry. I need water, apparently. Bevan had pulled his Ripper again. He was clearing the battlefield with noise and fire, but not with purpose. She ducked behind a column and then bolted low, flanking wide around the edge of the tomb. She didn't need to see Jared follow. She felt him behind her, steadying and grounding. "And who might you be, then?" Bevan barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I'd assume Na'ul, but the girl shoots better than that, traitor or not." Marin's breath hitched. Not from the insult, but from how wrong he was. She wasn't Na'ul, and she wasn't the girl he thought he'd left for dead on Coruscant. She was the one who'd learned to walk again on shattered legs, the one who held silence in one hand and memory in the other, the one who stood over the grave of her father and whispered a promise into stone. "You will not take me again." She ducked, broke cover, and dashed forward, a knife in her hand. Her feet kicked up dust as she ran, not at him, but under him. 2 meters, then 1. She slid and fired once, twice. The bolts cracked against his chestplate and shoulder, shoving him back half a step. It was enough. She slid low, dropping to one knee, and drove the blade upward behind his knee joint. It sank deep. The sound he made was not human. Blood burst from the wound as Bevan twisted in pain. He roared, kicked backward, and the boot caught her helmet hard enough to knock her sideways. The world spun. Her vision blurred. A light whine rose in her ears. She rolled and landed in a crouch. She saw Jared catch the blaster she threw mid-motion. He pivoted smoothly, injured arm trembling, and aimed. But Bevan was still moving, still firing. A slug hit the stone beside Jared's shoulder. Another tore across his tunic. Then one found him. Red streaked down Jared's left arm, his face twisting. But he stood. Marin's vision sharpened into clarity and focus. Iran surged forward, driving the haft of the spear into Bevan's spine. The older man faltered. His legs gave out. For a split second, he stumbled. Then Jared's saber ignited. A pale blue flare of light. Marin felt the pressure in the room crest like the moment before lightning strikes. The space where everything in the world held its breath. She was on her feet again, the knife still hot, breath shallow, heart a drumbeat in her chest. Bevan turned. There were too many enemies, too many ghosts. He raised the Ripper again and fired blindly. One slug clipped Jared. He staggered. His blade stayed lit. Marin stepped forward, her path suddenly clear. Her saber still hung at his belt, and she was going to take it back. The noise blurred. Stone and fire, blood and metal, the scream of slug throwers, the sharp cry of pain. All of it fell away. The world narrowed, folded to a breath drawn deep in her chest. Not from fear, from focus. Her fingers curled tighter around the knife. And she remembered. Too slow. Jerry's voice, sharp but calm, not cruel, never cruel, just true. A younger Marin, thinner, smaller, barefoot in the dirt courtyard behind the estate. Her hair was matted with sweat sticking to the back of her neck. A wooden blade, nicked and darkened from repeated strikes, hung heavy in her aching hands. Her shoulders throbbed, her palms were raw. Crack! The flat of his wooden training knife snapped against her inner forearm. She hadn't even seen it coming. Too slow again. I was ready. You thought you were ready. You're still thinking. He stepped back, not angry, just present, like the mountain, steady and unmoving, and she hated him for it. She loved him for it. I need you to feel the opening before it happens, he said. Don't wait to be certain. If you wait, you're dead, she muttered bitterly. He said nothing. That was the lesson. She set her feet again, tightened her grip. Again. The vision bent, shifted like the sand in a high wind. Stone gave way to fire. Wind howled through the tomb's broken arches. Ash curled through the air, dancing like smoke through the light. Scent of scorched metal, blood, and burned stone filled her lungs. Bevan stood ahead of her, her saber swinging at his hip. But behind him, for just a moment, her father, not a ghost, not a memory, not even the voice in her head. Presence. Darius stood in that same quiet posture he always held when she was hurt, or unsure, or just not enough. One hand resting on his belt, the other holding the training knife they'd carved together from the mountain ironwood that grew along the southern ridge. His eyes met hers, storm gray and unwavering. There were no words, just a nod. Go. The nod wasn't commanding, it was trusting, and somehow that made it harder. She wanted to hear his voice, to listen to the old lessons again in the weather-worn tone. You know the ground. You know his reach. You know yourself. But there were no more words, only wind and fire, and the weight of the blade in her hand. Her knife, not her lightsaber. Not yet. This was the blade she had carved under his guidance, the stances he drilled into her until her arms shook and her knees gave out. The quiet they'd shared when for the first time she'd disarmed him. Not with speed, but with patience. Wait, he had told her once. Not during a lesson, but in the hush afterwards. She'd been curled by the hearth, nursing a sprained wrist and a bruised cheekbone. He sat beside her, rubbing her wrist with quiet precision. There will come a day when you'll want to strike first, he said. When you want to burn everything down just to make the hurting stop. That's when you breathe. That's when you choose. The ache in her chest twisted sharply, catching somewhere beneath her ribs. But she nodded, her eyes stinging, because she understood now what he had meant. The blade wasn't power. The blade was purpose. And the girl she had once been, the angry shadow trying to fill her father's footsteps, was gone. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She was herself. A Jedi, a Mandalorian, his daughter. And the storm was still waiting. Marin blinked. The world rushed back in. The tomb was alive with chaos. Jared staggered to her left, his saber a pale flame in one hand. Moran was pushing forward again on her right, wounded but unbroken, the spear in his hand still gleaming. Bevan turned towards the noise, his attention fractured, rage tearing him in 3 directions at once. That was the breath she needed. The one opening. The echoes of training pulsed in her limbs, not thought. Instinct. Pattern. Stillness. The rhythm of choice. She didn't move yet. She chose. And the time was now. Growling low in his throat like a wounded beast denied its kill, Bevan surged forward with brute force, his biscod carving a vicious arc low towards Marin's leg. At the same time, his ripper snapped up again, barking fire towards Jared, her brother in all but name, his tunic already soaked through with red. Marin felt the world closing in as if the chamber itself were shrinking, the pressure of every angle tightening around her ribs. Aran moved again from the side, trying to intercept with a spear thrust, but he overcommitted, stumbling forward with a grunt. His armored shoulder hit the floor with a dull, sickening crack. Marin heard him clawing for balance, dragging himself upright with one arm as the other hung useless, still trembling from the hit he had taken earlier. Bevan didn't finish him. Not yet. He didn't have to. His focus shifted again, back to her. It always came back to her. The biscod swung again, and Marin cursed aloud, pulling her leg back and twisting her torso as she spun hard to the left, her boots scraping against the stone. The blade missed her by inches, but the weight of his assault lingered in the air, a threat that didn't fade. The tomb felt too narrow, walls pressing in, shadows thick with memory. There was no space for grace, no room to breathe. She reached for something smaller. A shuriken slid into her palm, flat, small, and sharp. Forged in quiet nights with Jerry's at her side, Mandalorian glyphs etched into its core with care and old pride. She ducked low and slipped around Bevan's flank, angling to strike beneath the backplate's lowest edge, where the armor gapped. It should have worked. It would have, once. But Bevan twisted with unnatural speed, his good leg pistoning backward with a brutal kick. His boot struck center mass. Pain exploded through her torso. The wind left her lungs on a single sharp exhale. She flew backwards and slammed into the far wall. Her backplate hit first, the impact jarring through her spine and snapping her head forward with a jolt. She dropped. Her knees slammed into the stone. The world swam and splintered. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in the tomb anymore. She was back in the clearing on Tanagas, pinned beneath cables, her arms twitching as the paralysis began. The sound of rustling trees above her, Noel's voice low and cold, scrape of a vibroblade. She'd been helpless, silenced, nearly broken. Bevan hadn't been there, but he'd sent them. She squeezed her eyes shut, breathed through the memory, and bit down the scream clawing in her throat. No. When she opened her eyes again, the darkness flinched. Across the chamber, Jared was still standing, blood soaked through his tunic. His saber hissed with pale fire beside him, his arms trembling, his eyes locked on her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They were past words now. Her hand found the blaster in her boot. She pushed herself upright with a low, defiant grunt. Her ribs screamed, but the armor held. That had always been the point. This armor wasn't just Mandalorian, it wasn't just a daughter's tribute. It was hers, worn in silence and rebuilt in pain. Forged across so many battles she no longer remembered them all. She leveled the blaster and fired. 6 shots. 2 struck. Clean hits to the shoulder, enough to stagger him. Click. It was dry. Horse, she muttered and dropped it. Her hand reached under the cloak beneath the back edge of her backplate. There. Her fingers curled around the grip of her DE-10. It was familiar, heavy and steady. She rose slowly, deliberately. The weight of the pistol in her hand was balanced by something else. Her other hand already drifting to her belt. She wasn't ready to ignite the saber. Not yet. Not until he forced it. She fired again, a precise shot to the shoulder. The recoil snapped through her arm, satisfying. And as the bolt cracked across Bevan's pauldron, staggering him half a step, her other hand triggered the release clasp behind her back. There was a soft magnetic hiss. Snap. Her second saber dropped into her palm, not the orange and black one he wore like a prize at his hip. That had been taken. This new saber was plain, built after everything, Bastine, the chapel, the clearing, after her own blood stained the dirt. She wasn't even, sorry. After her own blood stained the dirt of home, no name yet, no legend, but it was hers. Bevan grunted, twisted slightly, and laughed. It was a low, cold sound. It echoed in the tomb like it had been waiting there all along. He straightened and looked at her fully. The red glow of the torches danced across his scarred helmet, the dented plates, the cracked chest plate. "Oh," he rasped, his voice filled with venomous delight. "It's the Delish." He tilted his head almost fondly, and she saw it in the motion. The contempt. "Of course. But I should have guessed by now." He dropped the Emperor Ripper to the floor with a clang that rang far too loud. And then his hand reached for her old saber. Her saber. He drew it with the confidence of a man who thought that it was his. The orange-black blade ignited with a deep hiss. Black core, silver-orange halo. The sound hit her like a slap, familiar and wrong all at once. Same sound that had lit the roof of the chapel. Same blade they had used to mark her, to steal her voice, leave her broken. He raised it in a mock salute, 2 fingers brushing the hilt in a twisted imitation of respect. Marin did not flinch. She stood tall, her DE-10 steady in one hand, her new saber still dark in the other. The tomb fell still. But inside her, something moved. Not pain, not fear. The storm. Bevan thought he could break her, thought he could own the blade he'd taken, thought her silence had been defeat. Duran had broken her once, back on Bastine. Bevan's shadows had almost done so again, but she was still here. Because they came. Aran, Ethan, and Jared. Because Jarius had taught her not how to win, but how to endure, how to choose, and how to rise. And the storm had begun to move. That's the end of chapter 27, my friends. We have an ad starting in just under 4 minutes. I get a drink of water here. Okay. Chapter 28. Marin swore under her breath, her grip tightening around the DE-10 until her knuckles threatened to lock. Her chest still burned from the blow she'd taken earlier, and each breath clawed at the old ache in her ribs, a flare of pain she hadn't shaken since the clearing. Her knees throbbed under the strain of every step, still scarred deep from that ambush weeks ago. But none of that mattered now, because Bevan was holding her lightsaber. The hum of its orange blade crackled in the tomb like a wrong note, familiar but soured. It wasn't his to wield, it never had been. That sound in his hands felt like betrayal. She didn't hesitate. In a single sharp motion, she pivoted and tossed the DE-10 towards Aran. He caught it without question, his posture sagging with blood loss, but his eyes locked steady on her. No words passed between them. They didn't need words anymore. Her focus narrowed. With a deep inhale, she thumbed the activation plate on her saber. It answered her with a clear, sharp, snap hiss. Orange light spilled into the crypt, casting fire along the pitted walls. The blade was clean, unmarked, and simple. Not a symbol, not a legacy. A weapon built in silence after the chapel, after her first blade had been taken. After the world she knew had cracked open and left her gasping and trying to find her footing. She hadn't made it for the Order, or the clan, or even for Jarius. She'd made it because she had to. The weight of it now was not heavy. It was right. Second. Okay. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay. She circled Bevan slowly, her boots dragging faint scuffs along the stone. Each step jarred her knees, and pain lancing upward with every shift, but she kept moving. The tomb's air was dense with heat and blood, copper and carbon scoring, and the stink of pain. The torchlight wavered, like the force itself held its breath. We've an ad starting in 41 seconds. She let it in, not as a weapon, but as a rhythm, breath, and pulse. Let it brush her skin like wind. She didn't try to master it, she just followed. Bevan paced her, blade angled lazily toward the floor, his grip loose, arrogant. Come and take it, then, he sneered. If you wanted this so badly, you shouldn't have lost it. Poor form, that. The insult slid against her like gravel, sharp but meaningless. She didn't answer, not with words. Her saber lifted, a shift in stance, a quiet breath. And then she moved. I'm gonna stop right there, because we're about to be in an ad, my friends. Go get us a drink of water, grab a snack, have a stretch, because I've been super focus mode, and I'm gonna do that. I will see you in a minute and a half. Alright, my friends. I just wanted to apologize for the camera lag, because I'm seeing it too. That is because I was testing a setting here on... I was testing a setting in OBS, and I didn't realize that it was going to do that. So, I apologize for the extra lag this evening. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay. I was just trying to test something. Alright. Okay. Alright. There was no cry, no flourish, no show. Just a clean, cutting lunge, her blade low, sweeping upward towards his waist. A strike to carve open the space between them. Bevan reacted with brute instinct. Her stolen saber came crashing down to meet hers. Orange-black on orange. Sparks flared. fumes shook with the impact. He wasn't graceful. He didn't need to be. He had weight, strength, and hate. His elbow drove forward, too fast for her to fully avoid. She tried to turn, but it caught the side of her helmet, spinning her half around. Her neck cracked. Her stance buckled. Pain flared down her spine, but she moved anyway. She twisted and brought the saber down hard across his outstretched arm. The blade connected. It wasn't deep, but it was enough. She felt it singe against plating, biting into synthweave beneath. Bevan snarled and retaliated without thought, his Beskod snapping forward for her gut in a wide, vicious stab. She dropped low, her blade snapping back up to deflect. But then a blaster bolt slammed into him from the side. Aran. The shot hit just above the ribs, same spot Marin had struck before. Sparks burst from the impact. Bevan faltered, his balance shifting, and then his grip slipped. Her first saber fell. The blade sputtered out midair, and the hilt struck stone with a dull, final clatter. Marin didn't think. Her body knew. She stepped back, both hands braced now on her current saber, elbows bent, blade vertical. She set her footing, her breath hissing between her teeth. Her knees screamed in protest, but she didn't fall. Bevan came at her with a roar, the Beskod raised overhead. Steel met plasma. The sound of impact was searing. Smoke curled instantly from the point of contact. The Beskod didn't shatter, but it burned. Orange light crawled down the edge of the blade like veins of fire, the Beskar glowing hotter and brighter until it hissed. Marin didn't back away. She shoved forward, pivoting on her back foot, letting her weight drop, and dragging the saber down the length of the Beskod. And then she turned, lean and fast, and drove her elbow into his visor. The impact sent pain lancing up her arm. He stumbled. It was enough. His balance twisted, the helmet jerked sideways. He staggered, footing slipping against the uneven stone. Marin didn't press. She let the motion settle, her knees shaking. Her chest rose and fell in deep, deliberate breaths. The force moved around her again, cool and grounding. Aran was upright now, circling from the right. He was limping, blood streaking his side, but the DE-10 was steady in his hand. And on the other side, Jared, moving slowly, his saber still lit. His left arm was clasped to his side, but his grip was steady. He came from Bevan's left, blade angled high, a classic Katani strike, towards the neck. Marin felt the shift of breath before it happened. The force tensed. Bevan twisted and stabbed outward, right for her. She moved backwards, hard. The Beskod slashed through empty space where her thigh had been. Pain lanced at both knees when she landed, jolting her entire body, but she was standing. Still standing. Bevan looked up. One saber lost. He was surrounded and wounded, and for the first time, he looked wary. Bevan ducked beneath Jared's blade, twisting like a serpent beneath steel, and turned with a guttural snarl. His fist slammed straight into Jared's ribs with brutal force. The sound was unmistakable, metal striking bone, and Marin felt it like a tremor through the floor. Jared's body lifted off the ground from the sheer impact, and then he crashed hard against the far wall. A ragged gasp tore from his lungs, more air than voice, and he slumped before catching himself against the stone with his good arm. But Bevan had no time to enjoy the damage he'd done. Rand's spear struck a heartbeat later. The sound it made as it punched into the already damaged knee was hard and sharp and wet. The tip buried itself between cracked plating and flesh, and Bevan roared, the pain jerking him into a staggered half-turn. His weight faltered. He nearly dropped to a knee. They were wearing him down. Marin felt it, somewhere beneath the ache in her chest, the raw burn in her knees, the fatigue ghosting her arms like bruises. He was slowing, breaking, but not fast enough, because Bevan wasn't retreating. He abandoned technique, swinging the Beskod in a wide, vicious arc. Raw fury behind every motion. the blade carved through the air like a butcher's cleaver. As he turned toward Iran again, movements wild but unpredictable, too erratic to cleanly counter. He was fighting like a cornered animal, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Across the tomb, Jared pushed off the wall with a wheeze. His saber reignited, the pale blue blade shaking slightly in his hand. His left arm hung limp, his tunic soaked dark with blood, but the saber stayed up. Force answered him, rough, clumsy, but enough. It threaded through him like silver through cracked glass, filling the fractures just long enough to hold him together. He charged. His strike came down like a hammer, angling toward Bevan's sword arm. Sparks erupted on impact as saber met steel. The two weapons locked for a breath, and then Merrin moved, her heart thundering in her ribs. Her own saber swept low, aiming again for Bevan's legs, only this time he was ready. His sword arm shifted, drawing in enough to block Jared's strike, a heavy gauntlet absorbing the brunt of the blow with a hiss of steam. Then came the retaliation. The best god whipped low and then reversed, arcing towards Merrin's chest with vicious intent. She didn't think. She moved. Her blade snapped into a tight defensive arc. The motion was familiar, an infinity form, looping, catching, redirecting. Stefan had taught it to her back when she could barely hold a saber for more than 5 minutes without pain. She remembered that. The field outside Montadon, the bruises that bloomed under her ribs, a quiet nod when she'd finally gotten it right. Now, saved her life. Her blade caught the Biscad and turned it wide, just enough. Iran didn't miss the opening. He lunged in from the right, silent and fast. His spear punched deep. Right between the shoulder and chest plate, the impact staggered Bevan, a hit that should have dropped him. But still, he didn't fall. He spun, powered by raw fury. His free hand, burned, bloodied, lashed out. It slammed into Jared's chest with a bone jarring force. Jared stumbled, his saber flickering, but not failing. The Biscad slipped from Bevan's injured hand, but before it could fall, his other hand, his only good one now, snatched it from the air like a cleaver. The blade arced downward. It hit Iran's shoulder. A burst of blood sprayed wide, dark and fast. Iran cried out, staggering, his grip on the spear failing. The weapon slipped from his fingers as he crashed into the wall, his breath ragged, his weight barely catching on one elbow. Ooh. Thank you, Wraith. I appreciate you. Jared didn't curse. He didn't fall, but the pain on his face deepened, etched across every line. Second hit had landed near the same ribs that were already cracked. He braced anyway, and moved again. He swept in on Bevan's weak side, blade arcing wide, a deliberate strike. Merrin moved with him. She stepped back, only half a step, just enough to center her weight. Her breath hissed between her clenched teeth, and then she surged forward. No thought, no plan, just motion. Her saber came up, caught the Biscad's edge, and shoved it aside. And with her other hand, the knife, thin, perfectly balanced, forged under Jairus' eye, familiar as breath. It came low and fast. She stabbed towards Bevan's throat. He swore, his eyes widening. Biscad clattered from his fingers as he ducked with a snarl and rushed her, his full weight slamming into her chest. They hit the ground together. Her back struck stone, pain detonated through her ribs, bright and immediate. Her helmet cracked against the floor. The world pulsed white at the edges. Hot blood sprayed across her chest. She felt it, but it was not her own. It was Bevan's. He was bleeding, badly. The knife had hit something. She didn't stop to consider. She fought. Snarling through gritted teeth, she twisted beneath him, trying to drive the blade in deeper. His weight bore down on her, pinning her shoulders, pressing heat and blood into her armor. Her fingers slipped along his belt, and he was moving too, reaching for something. No, not here, not now. From the corner of her eye, she saw Iran. He didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. He moved. Staggering forward, and he slammed the muzzle of the DE-10 against the back of Bevan's neck and pulled the trigger. The bolt struck the collar plate, searing heat and plasma. It was not a killing shot, but it was enough. Bevan convulsed, his body spasming forward. Merrin felt the weight shift. She twisted, braced with her elbow, and shoved the knife upward, hard into the seam beneath his belly plate. The blade punched through. He howled, a raw animal cry. Blood gushed hot and fast over her hands, but still, his hand moved, fumbling, grazing the pouch at his belt. And then her boot struck his side hard. She rolled free, but not before she saw it. The small, dull metal shape in his fingers. A grenade. He had it. The pin was still in place, but his hand was closing around it. He was still conscious, still dangerous, still down. The color drained from Merrin's face the instant she saw it, gleaming dull in Bevan's blood-slipped fingers. Her heart lurched, her lungs seized. "Jared, down!" she shouted, the words rippling across their bond, raw with panic and certainty. At the same time, her hand extended instinctively towards Aran, not physically, through the force, sending a sharp, soundless warning like a flare cast into darkness. There was no time, no thought. She moved. Merrin dove into a roll, curling tight just as she slammed shoulder first into the far wall. Her armor cracked hard against the stone, and the impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Dust cascaded from the fractured ceiling, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her arms curled over her head, her eyes squeezed shut, and she pulled the force close. Not in focus, but desperation. Instinct. She pushed. Not enough to deflect, but enough to alter. The grenade's arc twisted mid-flight, upward, not outward. The explosion followed. It was deafening, white-hot. The shockwave tore through the crypt in a single gut-wrenching instant, a roar of fire and pressure that punched through the silence and shattered it. Stone shuddered. Rubble rained from the ceiling. Shrapnel ricocheted off armor, walls, and flesh. Doom groaned, cracked, and splintered. But it held. Barely. And then there was silence. Only the soft crumble of stone, the hiss of smoke, and a single sharp gasp. Merrin coughed, her limbs quaking, her lungs seared. Her eyes burned as she forced them open. She couldn't hear. Only a high, ringing, relentless and absolute. Her vision blurred, but she felt it. The fight wasn't over. It couldn't be. Shapes emerged as the haze thinned. Aran, huddled in the far corner, crouched in a tight coil. His gauntlet's shield flickered and then died. His breath shook. His injured arm trembled, but he was alive. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Half sob, half relief, and turned. Bevan. He had no shield, no cover. Shrapnel riddled the breaks in his armor. Blood leaked from his side, his thigh, his collar. Thick rivulets painting dark streaks down the battered plates. One gash pulsed near his throat, bleeding freely. And yet, he still moved. Slow, staggering, and refusing to die. Merrin hissed and pushed herself upright, dust sliding off her shoulders in quiet whispers. Her knees shook. Bruises flared beneath her armor, and something in her side pulled wrong, deep and sharp. Her ribs, maybe, fractured again. Still, she stood. Her saber hissed to life in her hands, a steady flame in the smoke as Bevan limped toward the Biscad. "Stubborn Delish," he rasped. His voice was thick, wet. She heard it, blood bubbling beneath the helmet. "You're not leaving here alive," he snarled, reaching for the weapon. "Even if you could defeat me." He coughed, a gurgling, body-shaking sound, and something red splattered across the inside of his visor. Thick and final. Merrin's stomach turned, but she didn't look away. He shouldn't be standing, shouldn't be breathing. And yet, could she kill him? Thought hit her like a crack in her footing. Her grip on the saber faltered for the fraction of a second. This was the man who had haunted her from the shadows of Bastine, who had sent killers The Tanagas, who had stood at the center of everything that tore her from silence and called her to war. He had stolen her saber, stolen her voice. She had bled to reach this moment. But could she end it? Could she finish it? Her heart pounded like war drums beneath her ribs. She took a slow, deliberate breath. She had to be sure. Because if she didn't, if she faltered, he would rise again. He would come for her, for Jared, for Iran, for everything she dared to love. There would be no peace. Not until he was gone. The tomb felt smaller now, its walls cratered, the ceiling cracked, and the ground littered with dust, blood, and fragments of old things. And in the center, Bevan still stood, scarred, bleeding, clinging to rage, like it were armor. She stepped forward, slow and measured, facing him. Her hand tightened on her saber. Force brushed her skin, cool and steady, not demanding, not loud. It was waiting. She let it in, and the tension in her chest began to unwind, not from victory, from truth. She stopped bracing and started listening to the hum of her blade, the weight of her pain, to the words Jarius once whispered in the firelight. It's not the weapon, it's the choice, and when it's time, you won't need to think. She let go, not of the saber, fear, and the force flooded in, not brilliant, not blinding, quiet. Snow on the mountainside, the hush before a blade is drawn, the breath before the fall. Her eyes snapped open, steady, and alive with purpose, and she moved. There was no scream, no fury, just motion. She leaped. Bevan reacted. The Biscad rose, too slow, too heavy. Their blades met in midair. Sparks spilled like dying stars, and then his boot crashed into her chest. Pain detonated across her ribs. The impact through her back, her shoulder slammed into the wall. Helmet cracked again. Her ears rang, and this time she felt something fracture. Ribs. Definitely. She hit the floor hard and dropped to one knee. Breathing hurt. Standing hurt. But she stood anyway. One hand braced. Her body was trembling. Across the tomb, Moran and Jared were still with her, still alive, but too far, too wounded. This was hers to finish. Her saber had fallen, lit and humming, but too far away. And then she saw it. A glint of familiar metal. Her saber. The original. The one she built with calloused hands and a heart still half healing from her trials. The blade of Bestine. Of all the things she had survived, Bevan had tossed it aside and forgotten it, but she hadn't. Her breath hitched, and her eyes locked on it. Everything else, pain, blood, smoke, fell away. This wasn't over. Not yet, and not without her in the fight. Give me just one second. Need some water. Alrighty. Marin forced herself upright, boots sliding briefly in the fine grit and shattered fragments that now coated the tomb's floor like ash. Her breath caught as her right arm instinctively wrapped across her ribs. Everything hurts, she thought. It flared in her mind like a dry ember sparking to life. Each shallow breath fanned the fire in her side, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her hand dropped to her second E10 with practiced ease. The movement was automatic, drilled into her across too many nights with too little sleep and too much fear. The pistol snapped upward and fired. The shot cracked through the chamber, slamming into Bevan's torso. It staggered him, slowed his steps, but it didn't stop them. He kept coming. Teeth clenched, steps ragged. His armor was scorched and leaking. His gait uneven, but he kept coming. Marin kept firing. Each impact stole a fraction of a second, each second she needed, because behind him, just behind his blood-slicked boots, lay something hers. She didn't reach for it with her body, she reached with her will. There you are. Her saber, the one he'd stolen, the one he'd discarded like refuse, but it had not forgotten her, and she had not forgotten it. The force wound around it like strands of spider silk spinning from her outstretched will. Inch by inch, the weapon began to slide across the stone, veiled by smoke and shadow. Bevan didn't notice. Marin kept him occupied, each bolt from the DE-10 precise and punishing. One struck his knee. He faltered, nearly dropped, and roared in defiance. Sweat dripped past her brow beneath her helmet. She didn't look at Aran or Jared. She couldn't afford to. If the thread slipped now, she wouldn't get another chance. Another shot. Another step gained. The saber drew closer, and then he reached for his belt. Marin saw the glint before the shape. A holdout blaster. He snapped off a series of erratic shots, wild and half-aimed, but even a wild shot can hit. One did. The bolt slammed into her thigh. Marin screamed and dropped hard to one knee. Her leg lit up with fire. The shock of it spread through her hip and spine. She clenched her jaw against the pain. Used it. Let it look intentional, just long enough to mask the final movement. The saber hovered behind him now, low and waiting. She flicked her fingers. It rose. Her DE-10 cracked again, sharp and loud, smoke curling from the barrel. The bolt stitched fresh burns across Bevan's chest. He grunted and staggered, but he kept coming. The hate rolled off of him like heat, palpable, heavy, and feral. His holdout blaster clicked dry. He snarled and hurled it aside, and then he charged, limping, bloody and berserk. His biscade raised high. Marin dove sideways, half-controlled, half-falling. Dust and shrapnel exploded against the wall where she'd just been. Her wounded legs screamed. Her ribs howled, but she kept moving. Bevan's momentum carried him past. Oh my goodness! Hi, Kala! Welcome in! How's it going, Kala? I'm gonna let that play out for a second.
Kalakamatra rated my stream with 12 viewers.
Thank you so much for the raid, Kala. It's good to see you. For anybody who's new to the stream and just came in, my name is Meshla. I'm primarily an audiobook streamer. I write and read Star Wars fanfiction and have been doing so for 25 years. And I apologize for the camera lag. I was experimenting with something and it didn't work. So, but like I said, I have been writing and reading Star Wars fanfiction for 25 years. And tonight, we are finishing the story called A Warrior's Heart. We're on the final chapter. So I'm really glad to see everybody here. I hope you have had a good day and an awesome stream with Kala. And hopefully you will enjoy the story. It's not necessarily cozy, but story time. So, welcome in everybody. Make sure that you're staying hydrated and get comfy. I hope your stream went well, Kala. We have an ad starting in 2 minutes and 35 seconds. I might be able to snooze it. I know! We're always missing each other. So I am unfortunately dealing with... I know! I know, I remember you telling me that. So I'm actually really pleased to see you. I do apologize for anybody who just came in for the camera lag. I hope you can still hear me. I had changed the setting on my camera and it didn't work the way that I thought it would. So hopefully you can at least still hear me. But it's so great to see everybody. Welcome in. Enjoy the rest of the chapter as we finish the story tonight. There we go. Fight! He bellowed. Spittle blurred his shadowed visor. Marin exhaled and flicked her hand. The saber behind him spun once in the air and drove home straight into his shoulder, just beneath the joint where the armor had split. He screamed. The sound tore from his throat like something wounded and wild. The blade punched through muscle, nerve, nearly to the bone. His arm dropped instantly. Dead weight. Viscad clattered to the floor. She yanked hard. The saber ripped free and slapped into her hand. Her hand. The hum of it grounded her. It was more than a weapon. It was her. Will and fire and grief and defiance all forged into steel and light. She rose. Every joint protested. Every breath felt like glass. But she stood. And Bevan charged. There was no technique, no strategy, just brute hatred. He swung with his remaining arm, slashing at her midsection, her neck, anything he could reach. The attacks came fast, desperate, and burning. She met him. I'm actually going to snooze that. There we go. Her blade turned each strike with brutal efficiency. Sparks hissed with every impact. The Viscad shrieked beneath the pressure. The edge glowed red-hot, screaming as the metal burned. Still, she moved. Her ribs pulsed with agony. Her breath came in gasps. Her wrist ached. Her thigh was slick with blood. Still, she moved. She turned his final strike aside and angled wide. And struck. Not with the saber. With her fist. Armored knuckles slammed into his throat. She felt something give. He choked. Horrible sound, wet and hollow, staggering him backwards. His biscuit slipped from his grasp again, but he wasn't done. Snarling, he grabbed her wrist and twisted. Marin screamed. The pain tore through her as the bones gave. Her wrist cracked. Scream echoed off the tomb walls. He slammed his helmet into hers. The impact splintered her visor even more. Stars burst across her vision. Her nose broke. She felt it. Blood streamed down her chin. She hit the wall again, hard. The stone cracked. She slid down it, legs folding beneath her. The pain in her wrist and ribs blurred into a white-hot haze. She could barely breathe. Her saber, still ignited, lay somewhere across the stone floor. Her blood pooled at her knee, and still, she looked up. He was standing. Her jaw locked. Her knees bent, and now, she was ready to finish it. Bevan staggered, his balance unraveling, his boots dragged unevenly over the fractured stone, shards of shattered visor spinning from his helmet with each erratic motion. He looked less like a warrior and more like something unmade. His armor cracked, his breath rasping and wet, his fury distilled into raw animal rage. Blood seeped from half a dozen wounds, his body was failing. But then, something shifted. Not in her. In him. He stopped, straightened, just a little. The posture wasn't proud, it wasn't defiant. It was listening. His head tilted, his shoulders square. The battered helmet still clung to one side of his face, caved in and darkened with soot, but his stance had stilled, no longer driven by frenzy. He was reading her. Marin narrowed her eyes. Pain throbbed through her like a second pulse. Her right wrist was ruined, screaming with each twitch. The break had begun to swell. She forced herself to breathe shallowly and then shifted her saber to her left hand and dropped her shoulders low. One-handed, measured. The form was ancient, drawn from the teachings of Master Mendas, remembered through grit and repetition in the weeks after the chapel. She had trained this form during recovery, breath by breath, cut by cut. It was not meant for dominance. It was meant to endure. Bevan lowered his stance in response, dragging his boot until it knocked into his fallen biscad. His fingers closed around the hilt, one hand, barely steady. His balance wavered, the weight of his wounds dragging at him, but his eyes never left her. They began to circle each other again. Her saber burned low and steady in her left hand, held close and ready. Her right arm hung at her side, trembling only slightly. Every nerve screamed, every motion carved through her with fire. But she endured. She always had. Bevan struck first. She moved to intercept, not with brute force, but with precision. She feinted right, and then swept left, her saber biting down toward his exposed sword arm. He saw it too late. He parried, but not cleanly. Her blade sliced into his gauntlet, bright sparks flaring, metal shrieking. Blood followed a heartbeat later. He snarled and retaliated. The flat of his blade slammed into the side of her helmet. Pain exploded. Her head snapped sideways. The world blurred, but she didn't fall. Her footing held, barely. Her vision swam, but the battle remained in sharp relief. She moved again. Her saber slashed low, biting at his leg. She felt it connect, another scream of metal, another wound added to the toll. His return strike was wild and vicious, and nearly caught her at the elbow. She flipped the saber into a backhanded grip, her arm tight behind the blade, catching the swing with sparks and force. It rattled her, but she held. Her vision tunneled, every sound narrowing to the rhythm of breath, the hum of energy against steel. She didn't look at Jared, didn't glance at Aren. She didn't need to. She could feel them, hurt, alive, waiting. This was hers. I'm gonna pause there because we are about to be in an ad. And I need some water. I will be back in a minute and a half, my friends. Get yourself a drink of water, a snack, have a stretch. I'll see you in a minute. Alright, my friends, we are back from that ad break. Thank you so much for hanging out through that. I appreciate you. Hopefully it gave you time to get a snack, grab a drink, have a stretch. Everybody knows I need that. Please feel free to play with the channel commands. That's why they're there. A lot of them are self-care. So if you feel like I need a drink, or a stretch, or even a snack, please feel free to tell me. Alright. Bevan drove forward, shoulder slamming into her gut. She staggered, pain rising through her ribs in a tidal wave, but she didn't fall. He swung again, but her blade met his and pushed it high, diverting the path. That's when she saw it. her other saber, the plain orange one, the one she'd built after they took the black-orange one at the chapel. It waited among the rubble. She stretched her fingers and willed it to move. Ooh, sorry. The pain in her wrist ignited like fire, but she didn't stop. The saber began to shift slowly, inching towards her. The dust stirred with its passage. Bevan pressed forward, her blade locked with his. She grunted, her teeth clenched, and then she breathed deep. She centered and pushed. The force rippled. It shoved Bevan back, staggering him half a step, and then another. Dust and broken stones skittered away from the epicenter. He snarled, but the ground betrayed him. Her second saber lifted. It spun in the air, igniting with a brilliant, searing snap hiss, and she moved. The orange blade flew forward just as she loosed the first towards his chest. Bevan turned, just a second too late. One blade punched into his back between the armor seams, the other into his chest. He froze. For one long breath, he didn't fall. And then he roared, a primal, defiant sound. He ripped the saber from his chest with trembling fingers and hurled his musket at her with the last of his strength. Marin's body reacted on pure instinct. The orange and black saber smacked back into her palm. She slashed high, swatting the weapon aside in a burst of sparks as it ricocheted off the tomb wall, too close for comfort. But he wasn't done. He lunged, collapsing forward like a tower, slamming into her chest again. He wasn't harmless. A blade flicked forward from his gauntlet, hidden, cruel. She felt it coming. Her saber swung down. Metal screamed. Sorry. Sparks roared. She caught it. Barely. Her boot skidded back over the stone, breath catching in her throat, his weight threatening to drive her to the wall. And then, a shimmer, a flicker of translucent light flashed between them like heat haze over stone. She had seen it before, once on Coruscant, but now it held. The shield didn't waver. It pressed outward from her chest like a second skin, like a second soul. Not hers alone. A presence at the edge of her thoughts, familiar, quiet, and watching. Aran. His mind brushed against hers. Not words, just stillness, just trust. And in that stillness she moved. Her saber swept up, orange and black blazing like wildfire. The blade bit deep, resistance and then slack. The hiss of melting Beskar, the snap of bone. Bevan's scream died in his throat. And then his head hit the floor, separate from the rest of him. The body followed a heartbeat later, falling to its knees first. Almost like a prayer before crashing to the tomb floor. Silence that followed was deafening. Real silence. Hollow and deep. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of threat. Tomb walls bore witness, cracked stone, spattered blood, half-scorched carvings. The ghosts that lingered here didn't mourn. They watched. From across the room, Aran slumped against the wall, pale and shivering, his chest rising with shallow breaths. His presence stretched thin but steady, reaching outward, a quiet current beneath the surface of the force. She felt it brush her mind again. Not a demand, a reminder. Marin stood still. Her chest heaved, her wrist throbbed. Blood trickled from her nose. Her muscles screamed, but she stood. Her saber didn't lower. Not yet, because endings rarely came clean. And never fast enough. The sound of Bevan's body falling faded, swallowed by the tense quiet that followed. Marin sagged against the stone wall behind her, the last threads of the force shield flickering out as her focus gave way to exhaustion. Her limbs trembled, her ribs throbbed, her right wrist was all but useless. She sank to the floor, glassy-eyed, her gaze distant, locked somewhere in the haze between survival and collapse. Her saber lay on the cracked floor beside her, still humming faintly, with dissipating heat. She didn't reach for it. The world narrowed until she felt the press of her hand, warm and grounding on her shoulder. Jared. She flinched at the contact, instinct still on edge, but as her vision cleared and she saw his face, something in her heart eased. Not much, but enough. His hand remained there, steady, gentle. She could see the strain around his eyes, the way his jaw was tight with concern, pain and focus. She had felt his presence in the fight, but only now did the weight of their bond truly return. Her fingers curled slightly and then released, her breath coming unsteady in her lungs. A ragged exhale slipped through her clenched teeth. Pain laced through her side, sharp and punishing. She hissed and swore under her breath. Jared was already moving. He'd taken one of her knives, her father's knife, she realized absently, and was cutting strips from the ruined remains of Evan's flight suit. She watched in silence, brow furrowed as her vision steadied. And then she saw his real goal. He was working one of the lower forearm plates free from Bevan's armor. It took effort, and it wasn't elegant, but he managed. He then knelt beside her and slid the plate gently beneath her wrist, setting it against her forearm. He worked quickly but carefully, wrapping the strips around the metal brace with deft fingers, binding her wrist and hand. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. When he moved to wrap the wound on her thigh and then her shoulder, she didn't protest. She just watched. Something flickered behind her eyes. Grief, maybe. Or awe. Or the quiet shock of being cared for in a place where death had reigned only moments before. Once he'd finished, Jared arose, slipping an arm around her left side, and helped her to her feet. She leaned into him only slightly, but the gesture was enough. Trust without words. When she could stand again, he went about recovering her weapons. Her saber, the blaster, her second saber, which she clipped awkwardly to her belt with his help, her DE-10s. She stowed them as best she could, down to one hand. Across the room, Aren stirred with a groan and pushed himself up using the haft of his spear. He moved slowly, limping, his shoulder clearly shot. His armor was dented and blackened in several places, but he was alive. He said nothing as he passed her the borrowed pistol and a fresh power pack, just a nod. She returned it, her fingers brushing his lightly as she accepted the offering. It wasn't over. Not yet. The sound of distant footsteps echoed down the corridor, drawing closer. Their window to breathe had closed. Marin moved to Aran's side, crouching awkwardly as she began binding his shoulder with strips of Bevan's flight suit. It wasn't graceful work, not with one hand, but she did it. Her expression was tight with effort and focus. "Hooray," Aran murmured, his voice low. She shook her head. "You want it to get worse?" He exhaled through clenched teeth. I can't talk. "Naish, I can still fight, and I'd rather stay that way." They were running out of time. "We need a plan," he added. Jared and Marin met each other's gaze. "I don't think going out the way we came in is an option," she said grimly. Jared's jaw flexed. "No, we'll need to draw attention, loud and fast. Give Dylan and Master Card some room." "Distraction," Aran echoed. "Fight on the move. With luck, we'll find a way out." It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "Who leads?" Marin asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I do," Jared said without hesitation. "You follow. Aran covers the rear." Marin hesitated, her pride flaring for a moment even now. But then she nodded. It was logical. She was hurt. Jared could block better. She could anchor their middle. Her saber hummed to life again in her good hand as she breathed deeply and tried to still her nerves. Jared approached the doorway, peering around the edge. A blaster bolt slammed into the frame near his head. He ducked back inside. "We need to move. Now." He went first. Marin was right behind him, her blade sweeping up to deflect 2 bolts meant for her head. Orange-black light flared in the dust. She let the force pull her deeper into itself. She could feel Jared doing the same. Behind them, Aran folded his spear and slung it awkwardly before drawing his pistol and limping after them. Every movement hurt, but he didn't slow down. His sharp eyes scanned for targets, squeezing off shots when he had the angle. Suppression was his role, and he'd hold it. The first strike came fast. The Sith with a violet saber lunging towards Marin from the left. She turned into the attack, bringing her saber up to catch the blow and ride it down to the hilt. Sparks spat between their weapons. She shoved hard, through her arm, through the force, and drove her saber into his chest in one clean, brutal arc. He crumpled. Another Sith, yellow blade this time, rushed Jared. Marin stepped back to his side, their backs touching for an instant as they moved into formation. Her barriers lowered, just slightly, and their senses aligned. Timing, breath, and motion. They were one rhythm, one current. Jared twisted to deflect a gut strike. Marin's saber whirled, deflecting a barrage of bolts. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. To their side, Aren grunted and dropped one deathwatch with a shot to the throat, and then downed the other with twin bolts to the helmet. Marin pivoted away from Jared and made for the remaining shooter. Her blade moved in tight, precise arcs. A bolt caught the deathwatch in the leg. He stumbled. Aren finished him. Jared, meanwhile, crushed Yellow's offense with a brutal elbow to the throat, followed by a saber thrust through the chest. Yellow fell. Silence reigned again, for just a moment. "You two all right?" Jared asked, flexing his injured hand. "Fine," Aren grunted. "We've no time to rest." Marin turned, her expression unreadable beneath the cracked visor. "They're coming." Dylan and Stefan. Fast, with 20 behind them. No one swore, but the weight of it hit all of them. "We go to them," Jared said. Marin didn't argue, but she paused, looked at him, and then he stepped close. Their heads touched, his forehead resting lightly against the brow of her helmet. He didn't speak aloud. "I love you, Marin. We will get through this, together." The words reached her through the force, quiet, anchoring, and sure. Her hand reached up, resting against his side. "I know," she murmured aloud, voice nearly lost in the wind. And then she turned, blade in hand, to face the fire once more. And that, my friends, is the end of A Warrior's Heart. I think that I'm going to go ahead and call it here for the evening, since it is 10 o'clock, and I should probably get some rest. Hope you all enjoyed the story. I may be back on Sunday to read The Flame She Carries, rather short, so I may wrap it in with a writing workshop that's not scheduled, depending on how I'm feeling. So thank you again for being here. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all on the next stream. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Have an awesome night. Bye. Oh, I should probably look for a raid target. Sorry, guys. Let's see. I know. Maybe. Let's see. Let's go. Ooh. You know what? Let's go say hi to Mega Queen, you guys. I haven't rated her in a while. I apologize again for the lag. Hopefully you could hear me okay. For anybody that subscribed to the channel, please snag that raid message. And I'll get the other one here in a second. Thank you so much for everybody who hung out tonight, even if you were just lurking and listening. I appreciate every single one of you being here, and I hope that you enjoyed the story, even if it wasn't necessarily cozy vibes. You know, just kind of comes with the territory with certain parts of that story. So hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you all on the next stream. We're gonna go say hi to Mega Queen. She is currently playing at Palia, and I haven't rated her in a while, so we're gonna go say hi. Alright, my friends, let's get this raid going. Thank you again for all being here this evening. Have an awesome night.